Alright, go ahead and turn off the lights, lock the doors, and let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're immersing ourselves in a terrifying campfire tale, but one built entirely for the digital age. We are looking at a story that has completely haunted the dark, hidden corners of the internet. It's this deeply unsettling narrative about a young girl named Vailly Evans. But listen, we aren't just going to sit here and recount a ghost story today. No, we are going to completely deconstruct it. We're going to rip this digital nightmare apart piece by piece to understand exactly why it terrifies us so much, how it was literally engineered to bypass our logical defenses, and what it actually reveals about our deepest psychological fears. But to do all that, we first have to step directly into the absolute horror of Vailly's final living moments. So, let's get into it.
Our story begins with a man named David. And on the surface, David was just someone Vailly knew. He was just a guy she sat next to on a bench. Totally normal, right? But beneath that mundane, everyday exterior was a man dangerously, fundamentally obsessed with her. More specifically, he was entirely infatuated with her beautiful, bright blue left eye. One evening, Vailly is at his house, and she tries to leave because it's getting late, and that is when David's completely normal facade just shatters into a million pieces. He aggressively grabs her, screaming, "I said stay, I need to see that eye." Vailly is understandably, absolutely terrified, so she sits back down. To quote-unquote calm her, David offers her a cup of coffee. But we know this isn't a gesture of comfort, it's a trap. The coffee is heavily laced with sleeping pills, and within minutes, Vailly slumps over the table. She is now entirely at the mercy of a complete psychopath.
And this is where the story takes a horrific, truly visceral turn. When Vailly finally regains consciousness, her reality has become an inescapable nightmare. She wakes up to find herself bound tightly to a chair in David's bedroom. She is completely paralyzed from the drugs, but here's the worst part. She is entirely, agonizingly awake. There's this thick tape sealing her mouth shut, completely muffling her desperate cries for help. And sitting right across from her on the bed is David, casually holding a gleaming, razor-sharp knife. He looks at her and tells her that if he can't have her stay with him forever, well, he's just going to take the part of her he truly wants. As she thrashes around in absolute terror, sobbing through the tape, David leans in. With this grotesque, psychopathic smile on his face, he brutally extracts the beautiful blue eye he covets so deeply. He literally takes his prize, drops the rest of her body to the floor like garbage, and leaves her bleeding out against the wall to die completely alone in the dark.
I mean, David's sheer lack of humanity here is just staggering. Think about this. He actually tells her dead body, "Good night," turns off the light, and goes to sleep. Zero remorse. None. But the true horror of this story begins a few hours later. At exactly 3:30 in the morning, deep into the witching hour, right? David wakes up. In the pitch black of his bedroom, he hears a sound. It's a soft, agonizing whisper. Now, at first, he tries to do what any of us would do. He tries to brush it off. He dismisses it as his imagination playing tricks on him. But then, at 3:33 a.m., he looks toward the exact corner of the room where he left Vailly's lifeless body, and he sees it. A small, piercingly bright blue light just glowing from the darkness.
He frantically flicks on the bedroom light, and the sight that greets him is pure, unadulterated terror. Vailly has returned, but she is no longer the innocent girl he murdered. She has manifested as this grotesque, vengeful ghost. Where her beautiful blue eye used to be, there's now an empty, blackened socket, and it's emitting that supernatural, glowing blue light, literally dripping with fresh blood. Her mouth, which was once taped shut in helpless agony, now stretches open into a horrifying, unnatural smile that reaches from ear to ear, and it reveals rows of razor-sharp, deformed fangs. As David stares in absolute paralyzing dread, this nightmarish entity speaks her chilling final words in a deadpan whisper that just freezes the blood in his veins. "I see you."
Okay, so pulling back the curtain on this horrifying story for a second, we have to stop and ask ourselves, how exactly do these internet myths manage to scare us so deeply? Like, why does a story written on a random web forum or some creative writing site cause us to actually look over our shoulders when we turn off our phones at night? The story of Vailly Evans is masterfully terrifying, for sure. But to truly understand its power over us, we have to deconstruct the actual mechanics of digital horror. We need to look at the anatomy of the modern internet urban legend and examine the psychological wires running underneath the whole shebang.
The story of Vailly Evans is basically a textbook example of a creepypasta. Now, academics define this term as a portmanteau of the words creepy and copy-paste. It refers specifically to these internet-native horror stories that are transmitted virally from user to user across forums, wikis, and social media platforms.
But it's not just the act of copy-pasting that makes them so unique and effective, it's the environment in which they live. These are creative, highly collaborative hypertexts. They are built, shared, and constantly refined by online communities whose sole collective goal is to spread fear and unease across the web. Academic research actually points out that these stories act as metafictional texts. What does that mean? Well, it means they are specifically engineered from the ground up to blur the line between reality and fiction. Think about it. When you read a traditional Stephen King book, you know you are holding a piece of fiction. Your brain knows it's safe. But when you stumble across a creepypasta hidden in a random Reddit thread or buried deep on a wiki page at 2 in the morning, the context makes it feel raw, unfiltered, and dangerously real. The platform itself becomes part of the illusion, actively tricking your brain into dropping its guard.
To actually make you believe the threat is real, the creators of these stories don't just write a narrative, they build an entire ecosystem of dread. They use first-person witness narratives, so it sounds like a true panicked confession. They forge audiovisual proofs, like highly photoshopped images or distorted audio clips, to provide so-called evidence. They even re-signify everyday cultural elements. They'll take a simple digital image file, a nostalgic cartoon from your childhood, or a late-night text message, and turn it into a vector for a literal curse. And through this massive collective user creation, the story evolves. It becomes a shared, collaborative nightmare that eventually just feels way too massive to be completely fake.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is understanding the stark difference between traditional urban legends and these new digital beasts. Traditional urban legends, like Bloody Mary or the hook-handed killer, they largely originated before 1991. They were oral traditions that served as cultural morality tales. Their whole purpose was to teach children not to stray into the woods or to warn teenagers about the dangers of parking on dark, abandoned roads. Creepypastas, on the other hand, are strictly post-1991, internet-native engines of dread. They honestly do not care about teaching you a moral lesson. They are designed exclusively for entertainment and to induce profound, lasting psychological horror.
Researchers who studied these digital horror communities have found something super fascinating. They actually value terrifying, immersive content way more than perfect spelling or formal grammar. In fact, the raw, unpolished, and sometimes completely error-ridden nature of these texts is exactly what adds to their authenticity. It makes the story feel like it was frantically typed out by a terrified victim right before they mysteriously disappeared, rather than polished and edited by a professional author in a comfortable studio. The imperfection is the very thing that sells the terror to us.
All right, let's move a bit deeper into the psychological layer here and see how this all builds up. Because Vailly isn't just a random ghost randomly thrown into the digital ether. She resonates with readers globally because she taps into something fundamental within us. Why does the specific gruesome imagery of her missing eye and her razor-sharp smile stick in our minds so effectively? It's because the narrative of Vailly Evans heavily relies on profound psychological triggers that have existed in human storytelling for literal centuries.
Psychological and folkloric analysis from the sources reveals that Vailly perfectly fits the traditional Japanese yurei archetype. The creepypasta genre borrows super heavily from Japanese folklore, and the yurei is a prime example of this. A yurei is a vengeful spirit born from an atrocious, incredibly violent injustice, like, say, being murdered purely for a psychopathic obsession. Because their life cycle is abruptly interrupted, they become trapped in a state of agonizing purgatory, and they are obsessively, singularly focused on their victimizer. They do not want to just pop out and scare someone, they seek a distorted, eternal justice. They literally want the perpetrator to feel an eternity of the exact pain they inflicted.
Furthermore, Vailly represents the terrifying, overarching concept of the loss of absolute innocence. At the very start of the story, she is presented as a symbol of pure empathy and goodness. She literally stays with David just because she doesn't want to upset him. But by the end, she is entirely transmuted. Driven completely by the selfish ego and extreme violence of her killer, her pure essence is fragmented. What returns to that bedroom is not Vailly the girl, but an echo of pure, unfiltered vengeance. The true horror comes from watching absolute innocence get twisted into something so entirely monstrous and unrecognizable.
And the specific horrors described in the text, they are incredible examples of the visual storytelling of trauma. Her terrifying appearance isn't just random spooky stuff. The glowing blue socket where her eye used to be, that is the eternal wound. It's a direct visual manifestation of the exact trauma inflicted upon her, now weaponized to terrorize her killer.
That grotesque, ear-to-ear smile signifies an entity that has completely transcended physical pain and fully embraced the chaos of the afterlife. And her final phrase, "I see you," represents the inescapable gaze. She is telling David flat out that he can hide his crime from the world, but he can never, ever hide from her.
Ultimately, Vailly proves a horrific, undeniable point to the reader. A victimizer can never truly escape their actions. In the logic of these digital narratives, death is just the beginning of an eternal sentence. David actually thought he could simply extract what he wanted, say a cheeky "good night" to a corpse, and just move on with his life. But Vailly's manifestation proves that this digital universe demands a terrifying cosmic balance. The trauma doesn't just quietly die with the physical body, it resurrects as an absolutely unstoppable force.
Now, pulling back into the real world for a moment, it's fascinating to note the actual origin of this specific terror. This incredibly effective, terrifying modern myth was crafted by a digital artist known online as Nasuki 100, or sometimes Nasuki Cha. And I think this brilliantly highlights the immense, undeniable power of independent internet creators today. Think about it. A single person sitting at a desk somewhere, writing a story and designing a character on a platform like DeviantArt or Wattpad can tap into these deep, folkloric archetypes and create a modern monster. A monster that resonates with millions, sparking countless YouTube narrations, massive amounts of fan art, and for sure, a whole lot of sleepless nights.
So, as we close this explainer, having completely deconstructed both the visceral horror and the underlying psychological machinery of Vailly Evans, I want to leave you with this final, somewhat unsettling thought. Right now, we are actively building the folklore of the 21st century, bite by bite, post by post. Long after we log off for the final time, and long after the original servers shut down and decay, will the digital nightmares we've collectively breathed life into continue to hunt for new victims in the dark, forgotten corners of the web? Keep the lights on, and I'll see you in the next explainer.